over 130 residential schools operated in Canada. The first federal residential school began around 1883. The last closed in 1996. We Stand Together invites Indian residential school and day school survivors, 60 Scoop and intergenerational survivors to share their truth. This project is an opportunity for those on their journeys of healing to share their experiences and perspectives, so all can learn about the effects of residential and day schools and the challenges Indigenous communities still face.
Well, everybody knows me as Gramma Shingoose, and I think they caught that video we did last year. But my English name is Geraldine Shingoose, and I want to acknowledge my spirit names, Sky Woman and Northern Lights Woman, and I come from the Bear Clan, and my warrior spirit is Grandmother Turtle.
We Stand Together is a platform for residential school survivors, day school attendees, people of the 60 Scoop and intergenerational survivors to share their truth, to share their story, and to talk about reconciliation and the process of building relationships, building communities, building a better future for everyone.
Well, I do share my truth. It's the TRC in June of 2015 came to a close, and I knew that they had got all the documentation, they got the stories and the findings, and I knew that's like, just like the Aboriginal Justice Inquiry, that they would sit on a shelf. So I brought it amongst myself and just received a vision to go out and share my story. So I've been doing that for the last 7 years, with different organizations and universities, colleges and high school, junior high and elementary schools. Yeah, so one of my highlights was I was able to travel to Sweden and present my story to the Canadian Embassy staff, but also to the Sami people, because they're going through their own TRC. So I truly believe that that truth needs to be shared before any kind of reconciliation happens.
Talking about reconciliation, what does that look like to you? What does that mean to you? Because, we're seeing all these things, these steps that are supposed to be taken. And at least from my perspective, when you get through that list, that's just the start. But it seems like we've barely even scratched the surface.
Yes, it's, the calls to action, the 93 calls to action was developed, came out of the TRC. And what I'm seeing and witnessing and following is the education system. Like I know here in Winnipeg that there are different districts, I guess, school divisions that do talk about that history of residential school. But then you see other school divisions that aren't, or not even sharing in the schools. And it's depends on which part of the city that you're in, and but I do see that the education system is taking action, like putting it into action. And I also see some, our Indigenous people, putting a lot of action into bringing out that truth, bringing out that education and that awareness. But also there's the rest of society, the settlers, and they need to take on, and have more action. It's an example would be in the healthcare system. I've been recently in the hospital, and the nurses gave really good care, Like, and I knew that they were familiar with the residential school, with that history, and the doctors too as well. But the healthcare aides, like, and most of them newcomers, they don't know that history. Like, they don't know that history about residential school. So the treatment that they gave me was very different than my neighbor who was non-Indigenous. Like, they took care of her, washed her, changed her blankets. Nothing for me. Like, I'd ring the bell, they'd come and they'd say they couldn't do it, or they had to ask the nurse. So there was a vast difference. So I spoke to the manager of that floor and told him what happened. And then I told him they need to realize, like, I'm not going to not say anything. Like, I need to speak up for myself as a survivor. And, like, the way they treated me was very unprofessional and degrading. Like, so I told them maybe they need to know more about, like, the TRC, about our history as Indigenous people, what we experienced here in Canada, like, or are experiencing. So he apologized and he said that he would talk to the staff. And what happened was he talked to the staff and they came and they apologized to me and they said they didn't know. And is there anything you need? So they're just constantly like checking in on me after that. So the more the people become aware and educated, like, it makes a big difference. Like, they understand our history, but also to acknowledge, like, it's not our responsibility as survivors to educate, to bring that awareness, which I've been doing for the last 7 years, which is really draining. And I think that, but I also, on the other flip side, is I truly believe that people need to know that truth, because a lot of people don't know yet that truth. Like, you have you have people that work in the healthcare field and government sector, and like, in unions and all those places. Like, they don't know about our experience, and it needs to be shared.
Yeah, that's one of the things that really shocked me, learning about, well, both my personal experience and learning about newcomers and immigrants coming to Canada now, that in that process, there's nothing about the colonization of Canada, the removal of Indigenous peoples, the treatment of Indigenous peoples in there. So a lot of people just don't know, don't understand. And then when they see people in poverty who are struggling, they're like, what's going on? Why is this happening? Why is this group of people specifically seems to be a large part of different populations in terms of like homelessness or addictions. They have no context of that long history.
They need, well, when they do arrive in Canada, I think they need to implement, make it part of the calls to action, to put it into practice. I do participate in helping. I don't know if you're familiar with Heartland School here in Winnipeg, and it's an immigrant school where they're learning English. So they have me as a guest each year, and so that they're learning that history. But there are others that don't, immigrants that don't participate in or don't know that education or awareness, and which is really unfortunate because they're taught those biases and those stereotypes, where I've experienced incidents where I've been called a drunk or just like a drunken Indian, and and it's they need to unlearn those biases. They need to unlearn those stereotypes, because what it does is it's discrimination, it's racism. So we feel that as Indigenous people, they need to acknowledge the first peoples of these lands, and what happened, our history with the colonization and assimilation, and they probably experienced it too as well in their countries, and that's why they come to Canada or United States to get that freedom, from that oppression. Yes, so it can't be. It needs to be. There needs to be changes done, within. When they bring them in, they need to learn about our way, and when they do, it just I've seen a partnership with Muslim groups that are here in the city, and they invite elders and Indigenous speakers, and and we eat together, and it's I do have a lot of immigrant allies that are really good friends. But then there's also, on the flip side, there's others that don't know that true history of Indigenous people.
Yeah, I find exposure is the best way to learn more about people. Getting out there in your community, going out, getting involved. You never know who you're going to meet or the stories you can learn from them. And in terms of Indigenous people, First Nations, Inuktitut, Métis, there is such a wealth of knowledge that was suppressed for a long time that we can really learn from, taking different aspects and applying to the world. I think the mindset of respecting nature and being a part of nature, I feel, is an incredibly important moment right now as we're living through this climate crisis.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's as Indigenous people, we've always had that responsibility. We're a sovereign people, and we responsibility to protect the lands and the waters, because we have that relationship with the land and the waters, which was taken away from us. We and put into the reserve systems, and a lot of our people have their traditional hunting grounds where they go annually, and they go hunting and fishing and that, and then that's so good to see, because that needs to continue. But a lot of it was lost. Within my family, our traditional area was taken from us and made into a park. So our provincial governments are selling off our lands, at high rates right now, because, our crown lands, because the federal government's given them that authorization to do that, and that's not okay, But the climate change is currently happening. You could see it and witness it.
Well, this year alone, right?
Yeah,
the smoke, the fires.
Yeah, the fossil fuels, they just create all these winds and, and then the fires, and up north and Northwest Territories, and it has to do with the pipelines, and it has to, we need to take care of Nukumas, our Mother Earth, it's very crucial, a crucial time right now. We just seen it yesterday here in Winnipeg, with that storm that came in, and it's going to get worse. Our waters are, where there's drought, in the south, waters are flooding, and, so. But our elders and our old people told us a long time ago, it's time, to prepare. You need to prepare. And I think now is the time. I think our young ones need to, we need to prepare ourselves, because it's gonna happen, and we have no control over what Mother Earth or our weather or what happens. Like, we could have floods, we could have rain, we can have fires and earthquakes, and it's an awakening time. Yeah, so it's very important that we take care of her. And I truly believe our Indigenous people have been trying to protect her. But there's so much we could do. We're limited because, because of the treaties and the Indian Act and, taking the land. Like, people are living on stolen land right now, and, we never gave up those lands. And a lot of our Indigenous people in Canada that are living in unceded territories are protecting the land right now. When they're trying to implement their own, the Western laws, justice laws on their lands, but those lands don't apply to their land. But they use the police, they use that power, that state to, for the Indigenous people trying to protect their lands, the forests, and from the pipelines.
One of the major challenges that we're seeing, because it's very easy to feel isolated and kind of in a bubble when you're living in a city in what's happening outside in more of Canada. And a lot of these things, whether it's these fires, dam projects, pipelines, mining efforts, a lot of these things directly affect Indigenous communities because these people are coming into reserves, displacing them, not having conversations with them about the impact. And when we're seeing flooding, fire, and everything, it affects Indigenous people first because a lot of communities are out there in far away from like Winnipeg or other large urban centers, and they're usually the first affected by these disasters.
Yes, well, but one of the strengths of our First Nations communities is the leadership and how they take, for example, with COVID, and how they developed their own process and how they were going to control COVID in their communities, and they were successful, compared to non-Indigenous communities, and it was led by our Indigenous leadership and people in the communities. So I think if there was anything that needs to happen, emergency, I think our Indigenous communities would utilize all their the people that are familiar with the lands and with the waters, and because we were given those tasks, we know what to expect from the land, and we need to take care of the community. So I think that they would probably be the first to develop measures on how to take care of their own people. But sometimes fires, an example is fires in the community, they have to evacuate them into our communities. And right now, the people that are, and I keep current, to everything, and that's just part of what I do. It's good to stay in the present, and because of the past that I experienced as a survivor is very traumatizing, so. But anyways, the ones from Northwest Territories are coming in and they're staying in the hotels here. But right now we're receiving word that they're not getting the best care, and they're being put out on the street because of the rules that are being broken. So there's Indigenous youth that are stepping in and trying to help them, and Yeah, and so that's what we do. We take care of each other. It doesn't matter which territory you're from or nation you're from, because we're all one.
When you're talking before about unceded territory and, taking Indigenous perspectives to look at the land, that reminded me of the land back movement. Mm-hmm. And I know some people, when they hear that, they're like, oh, what, we're just going to give land back to the Indigenous people and then we're going to all get kicked off sort of thing, which is not the right thing. How about just explaining a little bit about what that movement is about?
Well, there are like parcels of the land that were never given up, but were taken and without consent. And we have different, like in urban centers, like say in Toronto. I remember going to a land back site, and the youth and the elders, they took that land back, it was a park, and they stayed there, they took it back, and it was because it's unceded land. And that's what I mean, the provincial governments and the federal government are giving up lands that never been, given to them. There was no treaty signed, there was no agreement, and they're doing it without consent of our leaders and of the First Nations communities or our involvement. So land back is basically protecting our lands that are ours.
Lands that were taken illegally.
Yeah, without our consent, and they're rightfully ours. And Canada is rightfully ours. I truly believe, and and it's. They've taken it and they're exploiting Mother Earth. They're exploiting the waters. They're exploiting the lands, from coast to coast. And when we're trying to protect it, it's, and when we're witnessing, we're seeing it, and we have allies that join in too as well, because they know, that, they're trying to protect the lands too as well. So, but then that's where climate change comes into as well, and you're witnessing it now. And so there needs to be a stronger front, to protect the land and the waters.
And that's something that we can all kind of work together for, protecting the lands, because my perspective is it doesn't matter where you come from or who you are, if the earth, or if we continue to treat the earth as it is, it doesn't matter where or who you were, we're all going to feel the effects.
Yes, yeah, that's true. Our youth and the younger generation that are going to come, they're very strong right now, and they have that knowledge. Some of them never experienced the same trauma as we did, in residential school or the 60s scoop and all that. And they're coming from a place where we originally came from, and they're very vocal, and you see it now in some of our Indigenous leadership, they're up there front and center, and they're speaking out and trying to protect our people, our women, and and even our lands here in Manitoba. Our people, we came from, it's supposed to be for all people, red, black, yellow, and white. But it was it never turned out the way it was supposed to. Our ancestors wanted all of us to live as one, and it's never happened. And us old ones, me, we I hope one day that people are able to live as one and equally and protect each other and live that good life. Like, our teachings come from that good life. That's how we walk. And that's what's keeping us going, and that's what's keeping the youth going. They walk those teachings, and it's so beautiful to see, and I'm just really proud of them. And then the ceremonies are coming out, and they're just doing so much. I'm just really inspired by what they're doing, and I pray that the future ones, like I have a great grandchildren, and I pray that they are protected, and they're not experiencing any of that trauma, because with those ones they broke that cycle, eh? Yeah, it's so beautiful to see and witness.
It's very positive to see younger generations, regardless of their background. There seems to be a hunger and drive to see a difference, a change made in how things are run in Canada and the world as a whole. Because
an example would be like, I don't know if you're familiar with Cambria Harris. She's 22 years old. She's the daughter of Morgan Harris. So whenever you hear her speak, she speaks that truth. And there's no, people try to bring hate and bring her down. She doesn't, she just focused on she brings out that Indigenous history, what happened to her mother and what happened to our people, and the genocide that happened to our people, and just watching her speak is so inspiring, because she's bringing out and trying to bring change, not just in Manitoba but in Canada, but also international and worldwide. People are listening, and it's so empowering to see her speak. And
it is really promising to see when people are standing arm in arm together for protests. The Brady Road barricade, when I went down there to go see, people of all backgrounds come together, hearing stories, listening, trying to figure out what's happening, calling for action against the inaction of government. What do you think we can all do from the perspective of non-Indigenous folk, people who want to be allies and become better allies? What are some things we can do as a collective, as a community? And then what would you like to see from the government? What do you think the government should be held accountable for and or take actions on, sort of thing?
That's a big question.
Let's start with
I'd like to see our allies and settlers, and it's happening right now. The family just really appreciates that public statement, making public statements, out there and putting it out there that they stand behind Search the Landfill. And making it public and making it known, it's and if they belong to any kind of organization or work within an organization, then bring that voice in there and make that change and make it public. They like that, but also an AMC. The chiefs met last week, so they call for the resignation of Heather Stephenson because she's not searching the landfill. She said no, and they want her to step down and resign. And I think by all, she should step down. She needs to step down and honor that. Those women's lives, and because the families want to bring their loved ones home to bury them, Like, and that's all. Like, that's all they're asking for is, and it's so, that's the heart, it comes from the heart to do stuff like that. Like, and anybody who doesn't do that is heartless. Like, they have no heart or for humanity. And that's what I see in Heather Stephenson, but also the families got so much support. Like, in the feasible study committee, like there was experts. They're very, they support the family 100% and want to do that search. And they said it's feasible, it's safe. Like, and Heather Stephenson saying, no, it's not safe. It is safe. Like, there's risks, but there's precautions for those risks. So I think people need to get on board, and it's simple. Like, this is search the landfill, bring our sisters home. Hey, like, that's all you have. You don't have to make it complicated. And if you do that, then you're honoring the wishes and hopes of those families. And it might not be just Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron's family. Like, when my Tanya Nepanak, like, and others like MMIW, like, they're missing. Maybe they're in the landfills too. Maybe all our landfills need to be searched. So on September 18th, there's a day of action across Canada to search the landfill, and people are like, I know Edmonton's got something going, and Red Deer and Ottawa and Toronto and Winnipeg, supporting the family.
Thank you, Gramma Shingoose, for taking this time to share your truth and to share your knowledge with us. Is there any words of conclusion that you would like to share?
When I was driving here, I was thinking about, and it really hit me. I spent 9 years in residential school, and I had to unlearn. Unlearn all those, like that hate and race, like, just bringing people down and talking about gossip, like all that stuff. Like, literally I had to let go of all of that, unlearn all those behaviors and of anger and all that. But one thing that, like I said, I was reflecting in during my ride here was I was a protector back then in residential school, because I would resist the nuns and the fathers and the priests. Like, and the brothers, I would resist them. And in my resistance, I would get beaten more. So the other child wouldn't get beaten. Like, I'd eat their food, like, so they wouldn't get punished. Like, just stuff like that. Like, and it's not people pleasing. I was a protector. And I think that I become a protector, like, as a kukum now, like, as a chapan, a great-grandmother. And right now where I stand is I stand with those families that want the land searched or the landfill searched, and all the MMIW families, and so just and then just teaching. I teach that true history, like, at the U of M, a Rhodey Medical Center at the Health Science Center. So I've seen students that came in that didn't know that history, and when they left now, like, they're an ally. So it's good to see that growth and that change, Like, within our allies and within society. So I think people need to wake up and just unlearn those biases and unlearn those stereotypes of our people and acknowledge our strengths and our gifts and our way of life. Yeah, so I'll close there.
Multicultural is located on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabeg, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene Peoples, and the National Homeland of the Red River Métis. With Multicultural, I'm Ryan Funk.